Good afternoon, everyone. This is Wenlin. So I'm Wenlin Liu. I'm a professor at Jack J. Valenti School of Communication, University of Houston. So I teach organizational communication there. It is a great honor for me to moderate a panel on healthy work environment. So I think this is really the time, no better time for us to talk about, the many challenges we're actually seeing today in terms of managing a healthy work environment. So before we start, I would love to invite our 5 panelists to briefly give an introduction of themselves, and then we will open up for questions and we will open up for a few questions. So can we start with Andrea, please?
Hi, I'm Andrea Alexander, the Chief People Officer for Rent the Runway, an organization that focuses on democratizing access to fashion by creating a closet in the cloud for women. And yes, this is Rent the Runway, in case you were wondering.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Lucho Vizcardo. I'm the head of international HR for the Western Hemisphere for Nabors. I'm in the oil field, drilling. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Christine Morehead, and I'm the Chief People Officer for One Medical. If you're not familiar with One Medical, it's a membership-based primary care organization, and we are now in the great state of Texas.
Hello, everyone. My name is Roma Desai. I'm VP of HR International. I work for MN Energy Solutions, which is a VW Group company. So yes, Volkswagen has or owns a company which is not automobile. We serve industry, marine, and energy sectors. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shashank Bhushan. I'm the Chief Talent Architect and VP HR for BMC Software. You may not have heard of BMC Software, but your IT infrastructure largely for most of you might be run by BMC Software in the back end. So hello, everybody, and happy to be here.
So thanks to all these panelists for the introduction. So I wanted to actually start this panel, since we're talking about healthy work environment. I actually want to start the panel by asking our panelists, what are some of the key components that you see really makes a healthy work environment? I think it probably means very different things for us, but I would love us to just talk about maybe there are some common components we really see that makes building makes a healthy work environment. So feel free to, Roma, please.
Sure. From an HR international perspective, there are different components, but the two most important I feel are the flexibility, and of course listening to your employees and taking care of physical and mental health. I think those are key for me.
Okay.
I think the healthy work environment from the way I see it is an environment where people find opportunities for themselves to learn, to grow at the same time, while finding avenues for being heard, like you said, the listening part of it, fairness in how they get treated, are very vital components of what creates a healthy work environment. And flexibility in today's terms, in today's context, has become almost like a no-brainer as one of the most vital, important stuff.
Yeah, I'm curious, are there other components that you see important in making this healthy? I mean, I'm hearing flexibility, the opportunity for self-growth, development, but what about some other components you see that are important?
Yeah, so I agree with everything that's been said so far, and I would also say that it likely changes over time. So what we see as a healthy work environment today may be different from 2 years from now, and so we need to make sure that we are continually assessing what that looks like and listening to our employees, as you mentioned.
So I'm going to echo what my co-panelists are saying. The way I see it is we are all on the learning curve here. What we knew what happened 2 years ago, where we were all learning from this, and I guess that in addition to flexibility, I will kind of combine into adaptability. You always have to find a way of either through surveys or whatever, but increase your communication with your employees. Sometimes I see where we're trying to find the solution of something that we haven't asked the employee, what is the problem, right?
That's really a great point. I mean, since we're already talking about flexibility, I'm just wondering, I mean, this seems to be something our employees has been asking more during the pandemic. So I'm just wondering, how do you see there might be a limit of flexibility? What happens if there might be, how do we strike a balance between the need to meet individual employees and then the goal of the entire team? Who sets the limit of flexibility?
Yeah, I would say as an organization at One Medical, we've set it high level, and then it has to be brought down to each individual department. So for instance, we were fortunate because we always had a hybrid work environment. We have in-office providers, but we also had providers who work virtually. So they never came into the office. So we had the tools there, but I think for our corporate teams, the same way all other organizations need to determine what the balance would be, we've opted to go very flexible and meet our teams where they're at, and some of it is left up to their choice. And I think if you give people the choice, you're going to have a really good outcome because they're more engaged and more productive.
Absolutely. I think we also found that with experience that when you allow the employees to take a decision about flexibility, that is when it is most productive and most positive for the culture that you're trying to build in the organization here, instead of forcing and enforcing something here. And over the last 2 years, this is one of the biggest learnings organizations have had, is that you don't necessarily need to have a line of sight on your employees for their productivity or be able to monitor and number of hours they are clocking in, etc. We've seen productivity being better or at least at par from a pre-pandemic time frame. And I think that's a true indicator of the fact that when you give the choice to the employees, they take the right decisions on that.
I mean, from a corporate perspective, what I noticed is, all the policies, everything was generated. And this is 2 years or 3 years ago in the headquarters, and that's how we create a framework and flow it down. Well, that has to change a little bit for us. We went into the country level and gave the local management at the country, because they are aware of the local laws, they are aware of the cultural, they are also aware of what other industries are doing in their own countries. So it was important to give them the ownership of flexibility and not just have it at the headquarter level.
At Rent the Runway, we have a corporate population as well as a frontline population. So we have 2 distribution fulfillment centers. And one of the challenges that we really faced was, how do you make sure that you are providing flexibility, but you're also thinking about all of your employees and understanding the inequities that may be created as some corporate workers it's easier for them to be virtual. We definitely, like, as others here, are leaving it a lot up to the employee, but we do have guidelines that we're providing. Initially, we came out and we said Tuesday, Wednesday. Eventually, when we come back to the office, those will be our company days where we want everybody in the office. Since then, we've started to realize each team is different. You may have a tech team that's doing a sprint, and there's ceremonies at the beginning and end of that sprint, so it actually makes more sense for them to come in every 2 weeks. And other teams, the once a week makes more sense. So we're actually in the process of continuing to evolve it, and at the same time really messaging to our employees that are on-site critical why it's so important for them to be on site, and making sure that they feel like they still have some flexibility in terms of flexible schedules as well.
I will echo most of their comments. Maybe something that I might add is, I mean, as you can imagine, the bulk of the burden is on the supervisors. They are not used to having, you mentioned the line of sight. The definition of the line of sight that we used to have on somebody that is a little bit more, how can I say, standard. Now having a hybrid environment, it cannot change. But how can we help in HR or as a company? We have to educate those upper management and those supervisors how to deal with, you're always going to have these goals at the beginning of the year, no matter if that person is at the office or not. So it kind of has that flexibility or changing or learning how to adapt to a change.
So thanks for all those great points here. So I think that flexibility I'm hearing here is really flexible in different ways. And I really also like the idea that this is really the idea of flexibility is also evolving. We kind of need to adapt that based on the situation. So since we're already discussing about flexibility as a way to deal with the challenges the pandemic has brought to us, I'm just curious, at your organization, what are some of the challenges that you're experiencing that really we have to pivot from offline most of the time to hybrid to online virtual most of the time? What are other challenges that your organization is experiencing?
Well, I would say for us, while it's all working very well, being a hybrid organization, you are missing that engagement, that connection with one another. So we're having to adapt that by bringing back we used to do very large conferences where we invite the entire organization once a year. And it was a way to reconnect with the mission, reconnect with one another, and that's really how we foster that teamwork and that camaraderie. So we're finding ways outside of that to bring people together for very special touch points and having that engagement piece front of mind.
Yeah, so the challenge of maintaining the same type of engagement, yeah, I definitely hear that.
I can add, in addition to the engagement, what I've seen in the past is the wellness. I'm sure that people here will agree with me. You can't imagine the amount of stress about not everybody likes to work from home. Not everybody likes to work at work. We kind of like some balance and some hybrid, but in addition to your work, you have staff at home. Kids not being able to go to their colleges, to their school, and hybrid. So there's a lot of stuff. I remember that we started doing some, how can I say this, conferences and education. Burnout, I have to admit that I'm not an expert, but I learned a lot, and I can personally feel a little bit of what they were saying and how to deal with it. But yeah, it's a learning experience.
I think one of this all resonates with me, and one of the other challenges that we've seen is when people are in the office, they often feel like it's great, we're connecting, and then they go home and have to do the work that they would have done that day had they been at home. So it's almost like, okay, I went to the office and I loved it, but now I have more work to do. And so really helping people think through, what do our in-office days look like relative to our at-home days? And how do we flip the switch back to something that's more in the middle, where before we were in the office all the time and we got the work done and it didn't feel like too much, and now we're just so used to being in meeting after meeting after meeting that connectivity is not valued to the same extent. And so we're trying to make sure that people still see the value in connecting, as you mentioned, because that is where the secret often happens, right? In those interactions that were not planned, and we're not gonna be in the office 5 days a week, but how do we make sure that we're still having those connections?
So one thing I think our company faced, or I faced, was especially the field service and our workers, or I would say repair shop guys. They could see that the employees are going and working from home who are office employees, but the field service, I mean, they have to be on site on rigs, and the workers have to be in the repair shops. So it was very interesting to, not that they complain, it was more about, okay, how do we make it fair for them? So when the working hours are less, or you have less jobs, which was the case in the first year, I would say in 2020, do not reduce their hours or reduce their pay. What could we do? We could take them into a sales coordination team or a tendering team, allocate some office job to them to give them that motivation. So I think that was something I faced in 2020 for sure.
Thanks for sharing that.
I think apart from the fact that employees in general are experiencing a lot of fatigue of remoteness, of not being connected. To give an example, in an office you bump into people, you have conversations just like that. You have a meeting for an hour and 5 or 10 minutes goes in just getting to talk a little bit about chit-chatting about the weather and sports or something. When you do a video call or a conference call, you're on the agenda. 3 items to be done, and tuck, you want to do. And more often than not, I find that meetings do not actually last even half an hour that it's been scheduled for. The trade-off here is the relationship. is that mental connection, emotional connection that we build at workplaces, which creates that engagement, that creates a retention of employees at the workplaces. I think those have become loose of late. And I'm sure all of us are struggling to find answers to those questions on how do you, still maintain the same level of connectedness, the emotional relationships, et cetera, that are so vital for organizations to flourish. I think that is going to be something that we'll have to really be watching for as the pandemic starts to recede, hopefully soon. Because the other fear that is there, for example, we have a soft opening of the office, people are going back, but you go back home with the fear that did you carry something back? Because it's not just like meeting with an accident while you're driving to or back home. It is bringing something back that can harm your family. Those are the fears that are really truly real. And so supporting that from an organizational perspective with mental well-being, with programs, and additional flexibility that it requires, being respectful of the fact that I say, I'm not comfortable enough. I will not show up into the office, and I think that is where the next layer of challenges are going to be coming in here, because the hybrid workplaces are going to be a lot more challenging. Imagine a situation you're having this meeting with 5 people here in person and 2 people on the call. The connection that people have here, and line of sight conversations are always a lot better than what you have over the phone. And so then managing that complexity where some are remote, some are in office, is also going to be another layer of challenge for us.
Well, I think those are probably challenges a lot of us could really personally relate. I think our speakers are actually already talking about the ways that their organization are trying to deal with the challenge, but I'm just wondering, are there we're already 2 years into the pandemic. Our organizations have all evolved and learned how to better deal with this. I'm just wondering, are there any core values or specific practices at your organization you found that they're working to help maintain everything we had before pandemic, or actually make our organization do better? And if they are, what are some of those core values or programs in place that are working?
I'd love to tackle that one. So we have what we call our DNA, and there are 5 pillars of our DNA, and 2 of them are really, I think, came to the forefront when all of this happened. And one was being very team-based, so our clinicians work in a team environment, and all of our team members are put on teams as they're working on projects. But the second is being human-centered. So I think that in our clinical team, when our members come in, when they're seeing their patients, they're very human-centered and looking at the holistic person from physical and mental health. But we take that same approach with all of our team members. So being human-centered means meeting them, each individual where they're at. And that, even in a hybrid situation where we have some people who are sitting in front of us in meetings and some that are virtual, just being very attuned to understanding and making time for those individuals in the beginning of calls. We try to not launch right into the agenda of the day, but especially in one-on-ones, really looking for, and we train our managers in how to be insightful and deal with their team members as individuals first and then employees second. So that's been able to help us through the past 2 years.
I think for us it was, from an international perspective, it was important to understand what works in the US will not work in Bangladesh. What works in Peru is not going to work in Panama, even though it could be Central or Americas, you can call it. So it was interesting to see what really the people in that particular country want, what's the culture, what are they looking for, and I think we tweaked it based on the country, and I think that was extremely motivating for a lot of employees in all. I have about 55 countries, so it was very interesting to give each one what they expect and need. We did do a poll. You always ask your employees, do not make decisions just at the local senior management level. Get the poll, and okay, there might be stuff you might not agree to, but just do it. They feel part of it, and then you make the changes which are more acceptable.
We have a similar situation where we try to implement what we call the triple T: training, technology, and transition. As you can imagine, we all learned about all of this. We also have a global footprint, And one of the things that I learned, no matter how you try to develop a global culture, a global initiative, at least on the pandemic side, it is so government-driven. No matter how much you try to help, I don't know, you call it, I mean, we were even willing to send vaccines or help our employees, and everything was managed, at least on the countries where we were, by the government, but we still were able to help and manage some of those core values through everybody. As you can imagine, the reality in our headquarters here in the US was way, way different than outside the US, but we were able to manage some. I mean, people start, within boundaries, traveling again, meeting people, etc., trying to transfer all these triple T that I was, but it was good. It was a good learning experience.
Yeah, I'm curious, are there other practices you want to share about this before we move on to the next?
Well, I know one thing that was brought up already is the fact that when you have a hybrid workforce, you often have hybrid meetings, right? Where some people are in person and other people are virtual. And prior to joining Rent the Runway, I was at McKinsey and actually did a lot of research on hybrid workforces. And one of the things that came up a lot was that you have these remote first or virtual first practices, where if any single person joins a meeting virtual, then everyone should join virtual. So even if you're in the office, you then get behind your desk and join behind your computer. At Rent the Runway, what we found is that does solve part of the problem, but then you have the challenge of people coming into the office and feeling like, I just sat behind my computer for my entire day, why did I come into the office? And so what we've really tried to do is find ways to ensure that we are including everyone. Everyone has been the one person that's virtual and knows it's harder to get their voice heard. So reminding yourselves of that in the beginning of the meeting and making and reorienting how the meeting is actually run. So how are we going to make sure that people can actually engage via the chat? We're actually going to pause and just do via the chat for part of it. And we're really testing a lot of these meeting norms. I will not say we've gotten it right, like at all. But luckily we have lots of time to figure it out because it's something that's not going away. And I think the biggest thing is just really taking ideas and trying them and then evolving them over time.
Thanks
for us as well, I think we've been trying to evolve on how we work through this. So having remote conversations, virtual conversations, but making sure that they feel like a lot real. So if it's an off-site, which used to be in some fancy resort, happens at your living room or your home offices, but you try and ensure you send food there or some goodies, etc. Build those, in the olden days, it might have looked like a gimmick. But today, it brings a lot of value because then you also see that your family gets engaged and involved on that. They appreciate that, and they appreciate the care that the organization is extending.
Yeah, so thanks. I think all those are really great programs. So on also a related topic, I know a few of our panelists, they're working actually in an organization. It's actually becoming more of a reality of our today's workforce. Is more globalized. We are having a more globalized workforce. So I'm just wondering, do you want to share some of the program at your organization that specifically could help better manage or accommodate the diversity brought up by a more globalized workforce?
I can do that, sure. I mean, there are different practices we initiated. I would just give you some examples. There's a country where they wanted, well, it was a sales office, so not really field employees. They all wanted to work from home, which is fine. The government, the local laws all allowed it. So there are certain laws in that particular country where the workspace in the home has to be equipped well, or else it's, well, of course, it's company's issue. So we gave allowances so that they could make their home office more ergonomic, I should say. The chairs, they can get raised desks. We also gave allowances for them because the gyms were closed, but they could buy equipment of gym and, I don't know, a treadmill or an elliptical for themselves. And that worked in a couple of countries, but it did not work in some other countries because they would rather prefer to go in the office. They wanted to meet the team. They wanted the manager to have a lunch session with them. They did not care about the allowance for the gym, or they did not get allowance for the desk. So I think it was important, like I said earlier, to understand what the needs are and then go with the poll and make the changes. And it has worked very well. Employees are very motivated. I do not see any retention issues.
So let's see. I will say that at least at Nabors, we were learning about DEI. As a matter of fact, I'm part of the DEI Council. I'm a leader over there. I will say it started about a year and a half ago. So if you think about what we learned in the last couple of years, and maybe in the last year about DEI, how to act, what to do, how to be more inclusive, etc. In addition to being hybrid and how to share all of this with your employees. What we also try to do, again, everybody's learning about this. What is this terminology? Well, what can we do to be more inclusive, even within the US, and how can we share that globally? We end up having a representative on every hemisphere. And again, it's one of those things. In one of our previous sessions, we talk about ERGs. That kind of become a little bit part of this DEI and how to share some of the stuff, generational, anything about male, female, or how different cultures act. I remember we started learning about different vacations. You know what the vacations in the U.S. or holidays. I mean, holidays in the U.S. mean this. Some of the other ones are a little bit more religious, etc. So it was a really good and interesting experience, and it's a pathway. I mean, we're still learning from it.
So actually now I do want us to move on to a different topic. So while we all know mental health is such an important component of being part of the healthy work environment, well, actually pandemic has removed some of the stigma associated with asking for help. But I'm wondering at your workplace, especially for managers, anything that you've tried that help basically better to prioritize mental health? What are some of the practices you found that are working that make this basically the need to ask for help more open, or better help your employee being able to express their concerns or ask for help? Anything you found that are working in terms of fostering a better environment for mental health?
I think we realized that very early on in when the lockdown started, that this is going to start affecting the mental health of employees, and we started to prepare our leaders for those conversations. Very quickly, I think in the first about 6 weeks or so, we started to organize these working sessions for some of our leaders of having more open conversations and training them how to respond to employees who may not articulate what they're going through, but how you sense it out. We brought in psychologists, clinical psychologists who started to talk to employees in roundtable sessions. Initially, we got nothing, but I think over time, we started to get a lot of feedback from employees because they started to appreciate those roundtables started to get converted into one-on-one conversations. And I come from India. I was heading the business in India. And you talked about the stigma. I think there's a big stigma around mental health there. Nobody would like to. We used to have a psychologist in our office, and nobody wanted to go inside that office because others would see, that person going in there. And now I find that people are a lot more open to say that, of course, to reach out on the helpline, but otherwise also reaching out to different people, managers, leaders, HR partners, to say, how do I get help? So I think that's a good. In some sense, if you could call that as a blessing in disguise with the pandemic coming in here, this has really come out of the closet and people are talking a lot more openly.
I agree with Shashank on the communication side. There's one thing which has really worked for us is leaflets. If you have insurance providers, they will give you, it's really nice looking ergonomic style of sitting or working, or hey, we have a EAP program, make sure you use it if you don't want to talk to your manager. So those leaflets we send out on a monthly basis, just kind of a reminder of small health issues or mental issues, or how do you eat, or healthy food habits, things like that. And that has worked because it just clicks, it resonates with them more. And it has worked so far, yeah, the leaflets.
So I would add to that, we've done the training as well for our managers to know what to look for and signals that their team members might be giving in person or virtually. But we're fortunate because we also are a healthcare company. We have physical and mental health solutions, and we look at that as the holistic person. But we've also, when we were going through the time of social unrest, we were developing, we sell to enterprise clients, we have 8,000 clients, and we were developing for them programs that they were saying they needed some help with. And it was like during social unrest, we piloted a lot of our sessions with our own team members who were experiencing a lot of mental stress. And we put on a session, for instance, for our team members of color where they could volunteer to come in. And these group sessions were led by health coaches or licensed therapists and just share their experiences. So by doing that, and then that we got such good feedback from it, more of those kind of sessions spurred up around women in leadership and the struggles that women are having trying to balance professional lives with raising children. And so we found that really opening this up into the workplace and having really difficult conversations it kind of breaks down that barrier, that stigma, that really distinct, this is my professional life versus this is my personal life. Because if we've learned anything over the past 2 years, those two have blended together tremendously. So I don't think, my point of view is that you don't need those very, very siloed walls between the two that many of us who've been in business for a long time grew up thinking that's personal life, you have to leave that at home, and this is your work life. Well, it's very blended now. So normalizing those tough conversations and talking about mental health really has brought a common language that we're all using in the organization, and I think that's been helpful.
So maybe what I might be able to add is we have the same situation. So we start with the workshops, and it was a little bit quiet. Everybody started learning, etc. So trying to think out of the box, we did a survey afterwards. And all of a sudden, after the survey, the burnout topic was kind of a common thing. Everybody started talking about it. So we ended up having workshops. And you wouldn't believe that after the workshops, people started relating, oh yeah, that's kind of how I felt. Oh, by the way, if you are experiencing something like this, you might be able to call this number. And that's how we end up engaging people, not only in the US, but it was globally. I mean, burnout, what is that? What does that mean? I found it quite interesting.
Yeah, I think talking about it is so important, right? Because it's normalizing it. And that is one benefit, right, of the pandemic. At Run Through Runway, we do a lot of the same things, talking about it, make sure our managers also know what to look for. And also the leaflets or sending via email, just reminders of what already exists, because a lot of times people don't think about it, is so important. One thing that we also started doing with our warehouses is actually we brought doctors in. So one to two times a month in each warehouse, you have doctors that come in, and the hourly workforce then is able to access those doctors. They also have access all the time to virtual doctors, but we saw really an excitement around it because it meant it's easy for me to go, and that was also a perk for them since they were going into the office on a daily basis. So I think it really does vary for your workforce, but finding ways to make sure that it's accessible and that people are aware of it is very important.
So I'm hearing like the changing norms, culture surrounding mental health, also various resources to make it accessible, removing all the barriers. Following on that, so actually a lot of technologies have been offered just to provide better healthcare, mental health, physical health in your organization. I'm curious, how do you see the role of technology in providing help? Do you see them helping? Or to what extent do you think we could better take advantage of all these new technologies to help specifically with mental health, or more broadly with like just to promote well-being among our employees?
So let's talk about, I believe what you're talking about is telehealth. So speaking about new terms, new things of learning, I will say, at least in our case, is in the early stages, similar to the first few months of the pandemic, you were learning how to deal with technology. I mean, okay, let's see, Teams, Zooms, WebEx. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that we were learning, and I believe telehealth in this hybrid environment is kind of becoming more and more popular. Are we quite there yet? No, but the more we educate our employees, our supervisors to spread the word, I believe the more we're going to get into the technology, kind of getting used to. There are certain things that you can manage on a phone or on a video, certain others you might need to go on a person. But yeah, I would say we're in the early stages.
I would go beyond just the mental well-being with using technology. And I don't know about you guys, but I've always felt that the HR function specifically have been bereft of technology because the investments are always less than optimum, if I could say that. and in a way, this pandemic has kind of given that acceleration to this function to add more technology. So whether it's listening tools or analytical capabilities or learning programs which could be rolled out virtually, etc. I think there's been a significant uptake of all of these technologies which are now probably becoming table stakes now. So I think of course mental well-being with telehealth, etc. Not just mental well-being, physical well-being is also moving towards the telehealth side. It's a positive outcome of the pandemic, but there has been many more technology interventions that the people's function have started to see across the globe. So I think that's a good takeaway.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't jump in now, because this is what we do. This is our business. So we have, I think that before the pandemic, when One Medical launched 15 years ago, we launched it with a virtual component and an in-office component. And I think that while it was a necessity to pivot towards virtual, they all have their role, but the integrativeness that you can have if you have a virtual component that is speaking to your in-office component is really the most helpful for integrative health. So, I think our position is that having both is ideal and perfect, because there's times when you don't need to go into the office and a virtual visit is going to be exactly what you need in that situation. But having it integrated and having medical records that show all of your different touch points with clinicians leads to the best outcomes, in our opinion. So thank you for that beautiful tee up for a question on, and I don't mean to sound self-serving here, but I think it's the combination.
Yeah. Well, since we are actually running out of time, I do want to, thank you all, our panelists, for all this great question, but I do want to conclude our panel by asking our panelists, so can you go around and think about if there's one thing that you believe is important to ensure a healthy work environment, specifically during a time like this, what would that be? And what would be the advice that you would give to our attendants today, how to better foster a healthy environment at your workplace?
Yeah, I'll go. The one thing, and it's kind of a couple grouped together, it would be listen, learn, and then apply those learnings. Right? And it's not listen through an annual survey, but find ways to listen to people through monthly surveys, as well as focus groups, as well as just picking up a phone or a Zoom call and asking to touch base with people. So really listen, learn from what you're hearing, and then modify your approach accordingly. That is what will make sure that you're successful.
I mean, in my case, I'm going to tell you the same thing I tell my team and my clients. No more complaining, get used to this, and be positive. The best way to do this is a new norm, whatever it is, right?
I guess my piece of advice would be to lead with empathy and to be human-centered and look at the whole person in front of you, and from that, good things will come.
I agree to everything, plus be flexible. Employers have to be flexible and listen to your employees. And empathy is, top-notch, yeah, absolutely.
And I think there's no one thing that can be done here. You know,
There's no one.
we've been doing, talking about for the last 40 minutes, and we can go on talking. So don't believe that there was only one thing is going to fix everything. I think we need to be flexible in our own thinking about how to deal with situation. Nobody predicted this pandemic. Nobody predicted how this is going to play out. We can't even predict when it's going to end, which means that we have to be constantly thinking on our feet, be vigilant about what's happening around us, and then take every day the way it is. And maybe resist the temptation to crystal gaze too much into the future, because that only brings in more disappointments at some point in time.
So I would like to give, can we give a big applause to all of our panelists for the excellent discussion of it. I think I really walk away with new ideas, new ways of looking at the pandemic in terms of how to promote a healthy work environment. So I would like to thank everyone for your attendance here.